I'll try to keep this simple. So I started a list. It was sort of giving me telling what I thought was going to happen in the stock market. And it was more written for longer term investors. And at the same time, I had this interest in short term trading, which people is something, day traders, people talk about that now. That's a big thing now. This was back in the 90s and no one talked about it. It was a very tiny little niche. This person, my partner, his name was Mike. Mike was sort of my mentor. So I was studying everything about the stock market, and he was my mentor in trying to learn to become a trader. While at the same time, I was building this list of investors. And those are two different things. I know a lot of people might, unless you're really deep into the market, you might not know this, but trading and investing are two different things. Betting on GameStop versus buying shares in the Fortune 500, two very different things. And I hope everyone understands the difference, because people get into trouble when they don't understand those. So anyways, I'd started building up this email list. I had this newsletter I was sending out a couple times a month about investing. And at the same time, I had this relationship with Mike. And at one point, I can't remember if it was Mike's idea or my idea. It was like, hey, I've now learned how to build an email list, and I've learned how to create the most basic website. I've learned the most basic stuff about marketing, and it seems like I'm good at it. Maybe we could do something together. We could partner together and publish something about trading based on his knowledge. So that's what we did. And that was in early 1997. That was actually the very first launch that I ever did. And so then we built that business from 1997 until 2005.
And then he calls you on a Friday and just says he's taking the business. What was the first reaction when you put the phone down?
Well, first of all, it was just like a gut punch. I just felt it. That was one reaction. And then the other reaction is I actually laughed. I laughed because for a couple reasons. One is he had no freaking clue about what it took to run a business. So the idea that he was going to magically create a business was just silly. And then the second one was like, I built this. Yes, we use his 200 or 300 words that he sent to me each day. But that's not what built this business. What built this business is marketing. And I did this once, I can do it again.
Did you think that immediately?
Yeah, I did. I had both of those. So one was like a little bit of, oh my God, I cannot believe it. I've got a mortgage to pay. I've got 2 young kids. I've got a family that's completely dependent on this business. And on the other hand was like, bring it on. It was almost like all my success in the next year was just to prove him wrong. People don't talk about this a lot. We talk about a lot of super empowering things on this podcast and resilience and all this, but the motivation to prove someone wrong, maybe even you call it revenge, that can be a very strong motivator. And I was like, yeah, we'll see. We'll see. A year from now, we're going to see. We're going to see who's who in this relationship and who brought his thought was, I'm bringing all the value. I'm sending these 200 or 300 words a night. That's what's built the business. And in my mind, it's like, yeah, right. We put out a good product, but you can put out a good product. And if no one's looking at it, if there's no marketing, you don't have a business. And, at the end of the day, we both have frustrations with each other. But I just think it was just not the way to handle it the way he handled it. And, the idea that he just walked away with, this user base that was generating hundreds of thousands of dollars a year and thinking, so it was somehow my fault was just crazy.
So he kind of took the business from you, but he gave you something. He gave you purpose in some capacity, right? Like, I've heard this before in talking, I don't know where I got it from, but it's somewhere in my head from people I've talked to, but like to get off self and be on purpose is the way to kind of drive yourself forward or drive a business forward towards success. In that moment, it sounds like you had that gut punch, which was like, that's the self, right? Like focused on self. And then you got to on purpose really quite quickly because, whether it be out of spite or, revenge or whatever you want to call it, it was a purpose to drive yourself and to actually move in a direction and not be, say, taken out by the gut punch, but to actually use it as fuel towards building something that is bigger and better and more magical and maybe even more in alignment with who you really need and want it to be. At least that's what I'm observing. Is that what it was? Or would you say that it felt like that at that time? Or did it feel different?
So that business that we had was a nice business, and I was making more money than I could have ever dreamed of. By that time, we'd already moved the family out to the mountains. We'd bought a home in our dream hometown. My wife had retired from the corporate world, and she was helping me in the business. The kids were thriving, and so that business and that income afforded me a lot. And I was also getting sick of it. I was over it. Part of the reason for his frustration was I'm sure he felt that in me, that I just wasn't excited about it anymore. I was getting more and more excited about marketing, about the possibility of teaching marketing. I had already actually started an email list teaching some of the stuff I'd learned about marketing that was completely separate. It was completely different. I'd never talked about it to my stock market people. I just started building it off in its own little corner, which there's a whole lesson there. I started building a list before I even thought I might have a business in that market. But I was over, publishing every single day. We were publishing multiple times a day. Every day the stock market's open. So, Chris, the stock market's open 252 days a year. And I know that because I had 252 days a year I was publishing. I was publishing usually, always at least twice and maybe 3 or 4 or 5 times. And so I was already starting to, this is a grind. And I used to be super passionate about the stock market, but I found I have more passion for entrepreneurship and marketing. So I was sort of ready to move on, but there's one characteristic that I have. I'm a very loyal person. I'm to a fault. I'm crazy loyal to people. And I never would have left him. I never would have abandoned him. And part of it was, he had helped me out as my mentor. Part of it was, I knew what we built for him was an amazing thing because, with his physical capabilities, this was an amazing way for him to participate in the world and to make money. I would have never walked away from him. This is after years of reflection. What I know now is I would still be publishing 252 times a year right now if he hadn't stolen the business. If he hadn't taken the business, then I wouldn't have been able to go on to Act 2. And, Act 2 has been pretty extraordinary.
Hey, Launch family, wasn't that a great clip? Well, hey, if you haven't yet, hit subscribe so you don't miss any of the upcoming clips or full episodes that we're releasing in the schedule. And go to getyoulaunch.com. If you're interested in launching, or maybe you just want to get some free training, we have a bunch of stuff up there that you can be able to subscribe to at getyoulaunch.com. So go check it out. And thanks a lot for listening. We're loving doing this podcast. And the bigger the podcast gets, the bigger the guests will get. And that's all up to you. So hit subscribe.